Good afternoon, good evening. I don't remember the time. I don't even know what time it is, but hello and welcome back, everybody, to the continuation of day 2 of Techno Ancestrality, the Impact Festival 2026. And I will be moderating this next panel called Fugitive Frequencies. So before I invite my guests, I just wanted to say a few words about why we have this panel in the first place. Well, I should start by saying I'm an anthropologist and I'm also from Jamaica. And this topic is really, really dear to my heart. I'm from a country that hosts one of the largest Maroon communities in the world. And for those of you who don't know what and who Maroons are communities of people who were formerly enslaved during the transatlantic movement, the transatlantic slavery enterprise. And these are people who escaped the plantation and in most cases, set up communities all in far-flung reaches of the wilderness to evade capture, I should say, sorry. And so these communities formed out of, the need to survive and the need to conceal themselves from the colonial power structure. And these communities exist in many different parts of the world, especially in the Caribbean and Latin America, in places like Brazil, Peru, Suriname, Jamaica, and Cabo Verde on the other side of the Atlantic. And so Fugitive Frequencies is a panel we conceived of because I want to sort of introduce Maroon culture itself as a kind of emergent indigeneity. And the point is, this is not something that isn't being discussed and debated around the world. Many Maroon communities are right now trying to appeal to the United Nations for recognition as indigenous people, which isn't uncontroversial because indigeneity typically is defined as communities that were the first inhabitants of a place. Maroons were not the first inhabitants of many of the places where they live. Those places hosted indigenous communities long before the Maroons came along, but this movement is forcing a whole reconsideration of what it means to be indigenous. And that's because the Maroons have developed some very specific and very, very interesting and innovative relationships to land, relationships to ecosystems. Maroons, especially in the Jamaican Maroon Wars, when the Jamaican Maroons fought against the British Redcoat soldiers for many years, they won. They won each Maroon War. Why? Because Maroons having lived in the wilderness, they became masters of things like herbal medicine to sustain themselves. They were masters at things like long-distance communication, where they invented a cow horn by the name of the abeng, which they used to communicate across long distances when the English army had no walkie-talkies, had no cell phones. Okay? Maroons were also masters of camouflage. They were costume artists of the highest degree who could literally, they could paint themselves to look like the jungle around them. So it is with this in mind that this panel, I really would like us to think now about what do these fugitive communities we call Maroon communities, what can they teach us about the logic of escape? Right? Can we apply some of these principles to things like technology, which is what Impact is all about? Right? Is there a way, based on what we heard last night from our keynote, is there a way that Maroons can teach us how to evade electronic capture, data capture, and algorithmic control? I would like to welcome our panelists. We have 4 panelists this evening. Meredith Yoruya, who will join us. I think she's based in Suriname at the moment, so she's joining us remotely. We also have Shanice Jemesi, Jimmy Carrillo, and Ronald Dykeman. Please join me on the stage. And we're just going to jump right into it. We're going to maintain the same format where each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes, and then after that we have a round of questions. I will just ask them a few questions, and then we will turn it over to the audience. Okay? So let me first introduce Meredith, who is joining us from Paramaribo, is it?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
fabulous. So Meredith
Hi,
is a yes, thank you. Meredith is a 27-year-old fashion designer and visual artist. In April 2024, her costume design for the Dutch musical Bonnie won the award for Best Costume for musicals in the Netherlands. She's done extensive research on, on maroon communities in Suriname, and her work has been featured in Vogue Nederland, and she has done campaigns for them and for other magazines. Please welcome Meredith.
thank you all for coming here. I'm joining virtually. My name is Meredith Churia. I'm a multidisciplinary artist from Suriname. And today I will do a presentation about fugitive frequencies on my beliefs. Um, so when I first read the topic of fugitive frequencies, I immediately thought about something mystical, something you cannot see, but you can really feel and experience. So then I also thought about the drum, like in the picture, little boy is playing and putting his soul into the music, and it's something I could really feel when I was there. Um, and today we'll also talk about Maranage. And usually people think about. Wait, I cannot see my screen.
Can you?
Yes.
Yeah.
When people think about Maranage, they usually think about just slaves as escaping plantations. But for me and for all of them, it's about creating a whole other world where they can be free, free of colonial power. It was not just about escaping, but it was about creating new ways of living. It was innovation. They came with their architecture, and um, and was yeah, it was world making. When I also think about Marinage, I also think about indigenous people, because indigenous people have always they have played a crucial role into the lives of the Maroon people. So in this presentation, I will highlight um, my work as a multidisciplinary artist. Yes. Um, to go further, before modern technology, people communicated messages through rhythm, dreams, symbols, clothing, for example, pangis, anisas, and through the forest. There are so many things we can learn from our tribal people, from natural medicines, how to communicate with the forest, how to hear messages that are being communicated through our natural world, like the forest, the animals, and also how spiritual messages are being communicated. For them, the forest was not just nature, it was infrastructure. The river was not just water, it was transportation. And sound was not just music, it was communication. As you can see, the previous slide, this was in Boven Suriname rivier. where there are a lot of villages and people travel to different villages like this in the morning. It's such a beautiful view, and it's it's just another way of transportation. Like they have boat taxis. What are our fugitive frequencies today? In my work, I explore um, image, clothing, and storytelling. These are some of my my images that I make. Um, so these pictures, for example, are made in different villages, and it's not that I planned on doing it, but for example, the middle and the last picture on the right, these were made when I was in Boslanti, which is a village, which is like about 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours away from Paramaribo, and I was there to work with the women. So all of them came with their kids, and I was there to teach them how to make clothing, and it was such a beautiful experience because it's such a different way of living. The women really come with their kids. The kids play. They know their mothers are busy. And for example, the middle picture, the children were just playing, and I was sitting there in the afternoon, and I saw children playing by the water, and I just asked them to capture if I could make images of them, and they were like getting stuff to make pictures like leaves, fruits, and stuff. So for me, this is like really inspiring to see how they live together, how they play together, and how understanding they are of things that are happening at the moment. In my besides photography, I also make fashion, and my fashion is a mix of um, different Surinamese cultures, but also very inspired by indigenous and Afro Surinamese cultures. I explore my identity. I'm half indigenous and half Afro Surinamese. And I think we can learn a lot from our culture. And there's so much knowledge, so much culture available, things that I don't even know yet. But for now, what is visible to me and what I can remember, I try to express through my clothing. This is, for example, a Pangi jumpsuit, which is very known in the Maroon community, and also now very known in Suriname because everybody uses it. It's like a national cloth, you can say. So I here this is a picture that was in Vogue magazine, and on the left you can see a guy. He wore it as a scarf. And for my in my practice, I always try to um, to s- to make like something culturally or something that's common. Like how can I use it? Like how would I wear it? The previous picture was from 2023, and this was from 2024 when I wanted to innovate more with the fabric. So I designed my own pangi fabric and made a mat like make a pangi mesh from it, and then I designed this beautiful bodysuit and um, also a pungy skirt and a top with timbe symbols that are also part of the maroon community. Here you can see the fusion of indigenous and maroon art. For example, the pants are indigenous techniques, but you can also see the techniques now in the pangis of the maroon people. Here you can see the scarf better. At the border, you have indigenous symbols. In the middle, you have the children of Boslanti. And I'm not sure if you can see it correctly, but you see the different blues. So that's a timbe symbol enlarged, so it can fit aesthetically uh, on the scarf. The matekloper is a very common jewelry piece in Suriname. Like everybody, every ethnicity wears it. So for me, I was exploring like, okay, how can I use something that's really common in Suriname? How can I use it differently? So I decided to make a belt from it. These are the costumes that I made for Bonnie the Musical, where I did research on different Maroon tribes and Maroon culture, symbols, art, and on the in the first and the last picture, you can see that I used pangi fabric um, and timbe art on the blouses. In the middle, you have she was like a spiritual guide, and I wanted to work with something different, and I came up with using the Afaka script, which another speaker will panelist will also mention and go into depth. But this is how I used maroon culture into modern art, contemporary designs. For my latest exhibition that was held in Cobra, I did more research on Winti culture. Winti is an Afro-Surinamese practice, and it has many benefits, of course, for the people who practice it, but it's a way of communicating with the spiritual world. It's about connecting the spiritual and the physical world. And when it's being recognized, because recognition is actually very important for many things, you can really see the benefits. Like even if you recognize the forest, a tree, for example, or people, you will be able to see the benefits and the lessons that these things carry. So for my latest collection, here you can see a few. Here you can see like many different elements. For example, many different elements from indigenous culture that they use in clothing. But for example, in the middle, you can see like this the sun in the back of the mannequin. It is that also
Yes. Yes, I think we're
He
actually out of
thinks.
time. So can you? Oh no, I was just asking if you could wrap up because we're out of time now and we have to move on to the next speaker.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
okay, yeah. Okay, I will just skim through the pictures. Can I still show the video?
I'm afraid we don't have enough time. We have about a 10-minute limit per speaker. So, but we can come back to it afterwards and maybe in the Q&A.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Meredith. Our next speaker is Ronald Dijkman. And Ronald has a deep interest in, he's a researcher of AFAKA which very interestingly is the only orthography that was created specifically for a Creole language in the entire world. Most Creoles basically just use the alphabetical system that based on Latin, that we use in most languages. But in his case, in the case of Surinamese Maroons, this is the only community that developed their own writing system. Ronald is an Okanisi Maroon of Suriname, and his research focuses on the meaning and identity of the Afaka script for the Okanisi Maroon community. His goal is to explore and document the role of the Afaka script not only within the Okanisi community, but also within broader societal contexts. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Aiken. First of all, thanks for the invitation, and thanks for bringing together this conversation around what the festival calls techno-ancestrality. I approach this topic both as a researcher and someone who's connected to the Maroon cultural history. A researcher at the Kibiwi Koni Research Center from Marcel Pinas, currently in a project called the Living Archives. At the Living Archives, we do change the narrative. There's an African saying that goes like this: until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always hail the hunter. So figuratively speaking, we as Maroon researcher are the lions telling the story from a lion point of view. As you may know, the Maroon communities don't have, let's say it that way, they have an oral tradition. So things about us are not already, always correct. So we do change the narrative. And as I speak about the narrative, which narrative? Men and women of honor, they free themselves. Free themselves from what? From dehumanization. They went into the interior, the Suriname interior, and they built sustainable nations. If you closely look at those nations, those communities, you'll see that the Maroon ancestors, they developed sophisticated technologies of survival long before modern technology exists. When we speak about technology in regard of this festival, in context of this festival, what do we mean by technology? When one looks at technology, one limits technology to machines and digital tools, excluding the goals of technology. What then are the goals of technology? A, to solve human problems. B, to increase efficiency. And C, to improve quality of life. So, in my opinion, when we talk about technology in this context, we need to include the goals of technology. So when we look at technology this way, in this broad sense, you tell me why Communicating over long distance with our Apintidrim is not technology. When we look at technology this way, you tell me please why Maronage aan zich is not a technology of survival. When we look at technology this way, you please tell me why transporting a bulldozer upstream the Suriname Rapids on 2 dugout canoes with 2 outboard motors, 250 horsepower outboard motors, without consulting weather forecasts, without consulting weight and balance charts. You tell me, please, if that's not technology. When we look at technology this way, you tell me, please, why building houses in difficult terrain without a hammer or a nail is not technology. So, when we look at technology, technology is not limited to machines. The Avaka script is part of this technology. I need to go to the previous slide. I want to make one point here. In my opinion, in the course of this conversation, I would rather use ancestral intelligence instead of ancestral knowledge system, which makes it AI, not as in artificial intelligence, but as in ancestral intelligence. So in the course of this conversation, I'd rather use that word. So the Avaka script is part of this intelligence. Is there someone present who can read and write this script? No?
A little bit? Okay.
Lord have mercy. I just concluded, my work has just begun.
Okay.
Mind you, folks, this script has been emerged from within, not from outside.
Yeah.
And in a context where literacy was controlled by colonial institutions. This makes it significant. This script is based on sounds. We have vowels, a, e, I, o, u, like short, a, e, I, o, u, and consonants. So what the developer did, he took sounds and made tokens. So each token is representing a sound. So in my work, I focus on exploring ways to disseminate this information, not as replacement, but as continuation of a living system, creating access to a heritage, looking for ways to reconnect with heritage, thinking about the younger generation and people in the diaspora. In my work, I said, I focus on storytelling, education, and gamification. So, once again, not as replacing tradition itself, but as continuation of what has been passed on to us. I want to end with this image. Not a machine, not a system, but a spider web. When we look at this web, a spider web, we don't just see thread, we see connections. Every line is connected to another. Nothing exists on its own. There's often a misunderstanding. For me, this is how I understood my ancestral intelligence. There's often a misunderstanding when people look on how Maroon communities relate to our ancestors. It's often described as ancestral worship, and very often with a negative connotation, as if this is separate from a belief in a higher power. But that's not the way we understand it. When we acknowledge our ancestors, we do recognize those who came before us, those who lived, those who struggled, those who survived, and those who made our existence possible. When you take these lines back, and then generation after generation, you do not end up in fragmentation. You end at the origin, at the creator, at creation, at nana, kejama kejampong, at tete kwa famua. So our ancestors are not the end point. They are just a line connecting past, present, and future. So you and I in this present age are part of this web. When I look at the Afaka script and other or broader Maroon intelligence, I don't see separate practices. I see a continuation, a living system based on relationship, based on memory, and based on responsibility. So maybe this is a way, ladies and gentlemen, maybe this is a way of looking at technology differently, not as something that has been built or is built outside of ourselves, but something that connects us across time, across generations, and finally from where we came. Thank you.
Jesus. It was fantastic. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Ronald. I think, well, in the interest of time, let's just jump to the next speaker because there's lots to talk about. Yes, you may come up, okay. Yes, I would just like you to welcome Shanice Sisi Jemesi. She's a multimedia artist, completing her BFA, her Bachelor of Fine Arts at Rietveld Academy here in Amsterdam. And well, according to Cici herself, she emigrated in the Netherlands at the age of 14, and 5 years ago, she embarked on a personal quest to find out what the cultural significance is of her Maroon background. Okay, from her background as a Maroon woman and artist, she explores how oral traditions, rituals, and crafts such as hair braiding, embroidery, pangi, which is traditional Maroon wrap, and tembe, wood carving, function as forms of transmission. Please welcome Cici.
First and foremost, I want to thank Impact for inviting me. It's such incredible to be here. It's such a pity that I haven't heard or found out about Impact before, so I'm honored to be here. Not sure how you guys found me, but I'm still happy to be here. So yes, my name is Shanice Jemesi, although I also go by Cici. I am a contemporary artist of Surinamese descent, currently living in Amsterdam. I am 30 years young and live in a small 35 square meter studio in Amsterdam that I truly love coming home to. This is largely because of how I have chosen to decorate it. It brings me peace, not because my life is particularly chaotic, but because I have filled this space with objects that I admire and deeply respect. As I mentioned before, I am a contemporary artist, and I will be soon graduating from the Rietveld Academy, from the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, the first week of July. So you all here warmly invited to visit. So put it on the calendar. It's from the 1st of July till the 1st of July till the 3rd of July, from 10 a.m. To 7:30. There will be a lot to see, including artworks for viewing and purchase, and the entry is free. I embrace the adventure of field research, traveling to different locations, speaking with local inhabitants, and immersing myself in the process, even when it does not immediately produce clear results. I still value the experience. Spontaneity plays an important role, allowing for unexpected discoveries and perspective. My field research takes on ethnographic approach, though on an amateur level, as I have not formally studied ethnography. This is intentional and tied to ethical responsibility, especially because my work engages with history. I believe that when you work with a historical material, it is important to conduct your own research rather than relying solely on existing resources. Through field research, I aim to draw attention to the limitation and blind spot colonial archive, which are often treated as primarily sources of knowledge. My work does not aim to produce ethnographic evidence or replicate existing knowledge. I want to make sure of that. Instead, I reimagine it. So my field research explore questions around loss, identity within the Surinamese Maroon archive. This is where ethical responsibility becomes central. What I ultimately want to achieve, the goal here is about ensuring that the Maroon heritage is passed on to the future generation. But through a different lens, one that moves beyond traditional framework while still respecting how communities sustain their approach through artistry. My work is not meant to replace history or be taken as fact. At the same time, as an artist, I allow myself to contradict, because I have the immunity as an artist. That's a beautiful way of being an artist. You allow yourself to walk a different path. So fiction can also be a way of telling the truth, especially when the archive is fragmented. So my practice is to exist between fiction and fact. We are all familiar with historical ties between the Netherlands and Suriname, particularly in relation to Maroon communities. History, however, is often fragmented, as mentioned before. These fragments create gaps that can obscure or even erase identity. In this sense, a nation can experience a kind of lost identity similar to a person who does not know where they come from and does not know who they are. As an artist, I work within these gaps created by the colonial archive. I might begin a project without fully understanding why, only to realize years later that it connects to a deeper question, a deeper meaning. Yes, I've been carrying subconsciously. These realizations often come through writing down my process, when suddenly everything clicks, everything falls in place. That moment is incredibly powerful. This idea also appears in my material approach. Since history and culture are constantly evolve its dynamic, I often take solid material and dismantle them into fragments. This act is symbolic. What it means is I intervene in their history, questioning their established fixed meaning. I do this through imagination, what we could call fabulation. I explore what lost identity could have been documented. I then reassemble these fragments into new artwork shaped by my own perspective, what it could have been if it had not been erased by the silence and violence of colonial history. The primary medium through which I work is performance. Performance allows me to create embodied, non-static work. I try to move away from the static aesthetic often associated with museums. For me, art should be alive and tangible. It creates a deeper connection, a deeper meaning. Within my practice, I take on multiple roles, as you have heard. I'm not just an artist. I am a researcher, an archivist, and a director. These overlapping roles create a kind of playground with a few limitations. It can be chaotic, but it's a meaningful of productive chaos. One example of my field research took place recently in the interior of Suriname, connected to my thesis, which will be published in 2 weeks. The starting point of this research goes back about 5 years when I created an artwork based on West African symbolic object commonly found in Nigeria, Benin, and Guinea. At the time, I did not fully understand its meaning, but over the years, the image kept returning to me almost subconsciously. I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to go to the last concept. The approach of going back and doing research has to do with a cyclical nonlinear engagement with history. A continuous loop I work with colonial archive, questioning its accuracy and silence. What I want to achieve is that the conclusion of my work is an artistic protest against the colonial archive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sisi. Well, let's move on now to Jimmy Carrillo, our final speaker on the panel. Jimmy is an Afro-Peruvian artist, writer, and journalist whose work explores the relationship between memory, territory, and technological systems. His practice often emerges from collaborations with Amazonian communities, examining how climate change and extractive economies reshape landscapes and collective memory. Carrillo's work moves between artistic research, journalism, and speculative storytelling. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Hi, how are you? Just give me a minute with this computer. That's technology, right? Okay. So, I want to talk to you about different ideas, but I want to talk to you about heritage, about territory, about memory, but also about sound and music. And I want to share some images with you. The first one is this beautiful photograph that hangs in my mother's house. Well, you can see there is it's actually my family. It's my grandmother, his brothers and sisters, and my great-great-grandmother. You know, that photo must be kind of like 80 years old, maybe. And the youngest person in that photo is my Aunt Hilda, who passed away just 3 years ago at 90 years old. So it is a very representative picture for us. I'm Afro-Peruvian, my family is Afro-Peruvian. We came from a place in the south of Lima called Cañete. We have a lot of histories related with this photograph. A lot of these histories are really fables, you know, like oral tradition. Like we don't know really what happens with some person that being in this photograph, but that's the beauty of that. There's a lot of stories and fables in our family. One of that I like the most is that we all came from the princess that came from that traveled to Haiti, and from Haiti comes from traveled to South America and to Peru. I don't know if that story is true. I want to believe, but I know that there is a lot of Peruvian families that have that story, and that is something beautiful. Let me introduce you also Victoria Santa Cruz. Victoria Santa Cruz was a singer, an Afro-Peruvian singer. She was also a researcher. She made a lot of research on Afro-Peruvian traditions. Also, Victoria Santa Cruz was something that I like to call a philosopher of rhythm. So for Victoria, African heritage transcends folklore. It's not just something that you can find on museums, but you can find on music, on sounds. And that is something that she and some other Afro-Peruvian researchers discover and rediscover. That sense of rhythm and sounds and how all this knowledge is related with our heritage. It is beautiful because a lot of instruments and practice and traditions that were kind of lost, Victoria and other people recovered it. And that's how we know now that these traditions continue live. And through the rediscovery of music, we call now, that's the idea of Victoria says, just through that rediscovery of music, we can rediscover ourselves. And that is a beautiful idea, actually. I want to come back later with that idea, but now I want to show you this photograph. This is Cachivococha Lake. This is the Amazon rainforest. I spent several days, months on the Amazon rainforest, do a residency that I just made with the support of IMPACT, STARTS, and ATA in Peru. I think this was not my first travel to the Amazon rainforest. Actually, I was a journalist, and I was a journalist focused on environmental issues, so I have to travel a lot to the Amazon rainforest. And I made some reports and investigations around climate change and around social changes. And I noticed there is something that happens that journalists and science usually report a lot of data, a lot of numbers, a lot of small stories, but not always connect those stories with something bigger. And that something bigger is sometimes stuff that are invisible, like music, like the sound of the forest, like the traditional history. And I want to work on that. I wanted to work with that. So I made a work that is called What Remains in the Air, that you can see on Basecamp. Is that the name of the place?
Yeah, Basecamp.
So that work has the illusion of bring all these sounds together and the reimagination of the history of this beautiful place. And this photo is not just a photo, this is a song also. She is Adelina Teco. She is a person who is part of the Shipibo Conibo people in the Amazon rainforest of Peru. She is also a shaman. But the beauty of all this is that she has a beautiful voice and a unique voice. It's like very touching. And this voice is product of practice, is product of tradition, but it's also product of the practice. She is a shaman, and she heals with her voice through ayahuasca sessions. So when I travel to the Amazon rainforest, I travel with the idea of known people around their memory, around the territory, around the sounds, music, and chants that they have, or maybe they lost. But what I found is that the older people have a lot of stories and memories related with sounds, related with chants, but also related with instruments that no longer exist, and with rituals that no longer exist. But there's something that persists, and that is chants. And that is a beautiful message that was a beautiful message for me. But also, Shipibo Conibo people have different expressions. One of these is the Kene. And the Kene is this beautiful textiles that it's really the work with these mathematical patterns is like beautiful. And the Kene is also a piece of heritage, and something that Shipibo community preserved from generation to generation, and also the chants. So when I speak with people about music and about memory, I speak with them about techniques also. And those techniques are part of the whole history of the place. So I began this conversation, this dialogue, talking about my heritage, talking about my family, talking about Victoria Santa Cruz, and I want to come back to Victoria Santa Cruz with this sentence that is part of her book called Reading the Eternal Organizer. There is no connection without mutation. There is no mutation without dialogue, no dialogue without action, and no action without rhythm. All of these presuppose subtle levels of rhythm, which daily life being the battlefield. And that's my final point. Thank you so much for listening to me, and we will continue with the dialogue.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. And so we're just going to have a quick sort of discussion. I mean, there's so many things buzzing around in my mind, and I'm sure in the minds of the audience. So we would like to, I just maybe wanted to throw out a few questions. First of all, I think, thank you, Jimmy, for fantastic, and for bringing in a different perspective entirely, which I think I really want to kind of hear you expound on a bit more. Meredith, starting with you, you mentioned marronage, which is, by the way, this is the word for Maroon identity, for those who don't know. It's typically, even in English, we use the sort of French version of it, marronage. But you mentioned marronage as not just escape, but world building, which I think, or world making, which I think is a really brilliant point I want to hear more from you about. My question is, okay, as a designer whose work has appeared in magazines like Vogue, is there any risk of turning Maroon culture and marronage into just, heritage, commercialized heritage? I've seen this happen in so many cases, even with Guyanese Amerindians, the way Amerindian crafts and so on are sort of sold and marketed to tourists. Do you think there's any danger of that?
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, is there any danger of when let's say your work, or when you present Maroon and indigenous symbols in your work and it's photographed for Vogue magazine, do you think there's a danger that this could become, you could be doing something harmful to the culture? Do you understand?
I do think there are pros and cons into with this work. For example, what you mentioned, photographing and making designs for magazines and stuff. Um, but it's actually already happening with a lot of indigenous cultures and as well. But for me, I think it's important that the stories are being told by the people itself, by indigenous creators, maroon creators, which brings more authenticity because people can copy things but they cannot copy the identity if you are not um, from um, from that ethnicity, if you don't have experience from the culture. So so there are dangers, definitely, but it's also important for indigenous creators to tell their own story, from their own perspective, and to actually empower other indigenous artists as well to continue to spread the word, because a lot of traditions are also are dying. For example, like the making the baskets, for example, the natural materials that are being used. Those things in Suriname, there are only older people who are still practicing that. So it's important for younger artists to really preserve that and make it, to innovate with it, so it doesn't need to be mass, but it needs to be out there still for other younger, for a new generation to still see, oh, this is what our culture is about, this is
Yeah.
these are the materials that are being used, and then we can value our own materials, our own culture, because everything is being westernized now.
Yeah, and visibility is power. I mean, that's also
Yeah.
something we need to highlight. But speaking of traditions dying, Ronald, I mean, thank you for such a brilliant presentation on Afaka script. I mean, this was good schooling, I think, that you gave us. But the first thing I thought about was preservation and continuity. How do you keep this alive? This is an amazing story. Like, is there any kind of education campaign to make younger or younger Maroons learn how to use this script every day? Is there, how do you prevent it from just becoming an artifact?
You know, one of the things I said in my presentation, there are some instances where innovation and tradition clashes. They just clash. But in the Afaka script, in my work with the Afaka script, I see the opposite. Technology creates a new access to heritage. So in my work, I explore ways to disseminate this information. For instance, gamification. And that's based on the way we Maroon learn, the Maroon way of learning. That's by doing, by storytelling, and by repetition. So the script will be alive by experiencing it. So in my work, I just let people experience the script. So that's a way of preservation.
Do you think there's one day that we could see this script digitized?
It is digitized already.
So
yes,
you can get a keyboard.
In the course of making,
Okay.
This is not the place to make known everything, but behind the curtain, we would say, it's in the making.
Thank you so much, and thank you for calling me out there about the things, because this is something that we were talking about in the previous panel, or that the panelists were talking about, that not everything needs to be known.
No.
And part of protecting what's yours is not divulging it all.
Sure.
So I really appreciate that point, and I wish we could come back to it. And CC, of course, the critical fabulation, which is interestingly going to be, the next panel is really going to be talking about storytelling as a technology in and of itself. And I thought that was fabulous that you gave us a kind of foreshadowing of that, where you talk about the importance of storytelling to fill in the gaps left by the archive. And I was just wondering about the Maroon Archive. How is that archive now? How is it maintained and across generations? Is it? I mean, we've heard of Avaka script, but is it still about oral storytelling and yeah? What is the Maroon Archive right now?
I think within the Maroon Archive, we have like a really interesting way of transmitting our history, which is through oral history. It's really beautiful, but there's such it's also vulnerable. Because when what is going on, which there was also a reason why I went to Suriname, in the interior of Suriname, to do research, is because of what I have experienced when I look at the generation, is that because of urban culture, moving from the inland to the city, you see that culture is getting lost. And I think it's such a pity, when such an interesting culture can be lost in a couple of years. And I'm kind of working against that. So it's the transmitting happens from body to body. If we look at the Pangi, for example, the act of it, of making a Pangi, the lapu, embroidering the Pangi, and the patchwork, it happens from the body and it goes back to the body by wearing it, which is a way of safeguarding history. But one of the things that I kind of had a problem with when doing this research, I had a conversation, an interview with the chief of Klaas-Kreek, which is partially my heritage because my father is from Klaas-Kreek. So I did all this contradiction about the Maroon history gonna be lost in a couple of years, and I didn't have to say that. He said it before, and it was really beautiful. And then I asked him, is there a way to make sure that Maroon history does not get lost? And because it goes through the mother line, and if certain women are not interested to take on this heritage, it can get lost. So I asked him, is there a possibility to discuss this during Krutu? Krutu is a translation about, it's a gathering where all the...
Assembly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly, and he was like, no, that's just culture. And it kind of, it was such a hard thing to swallow. Like, how are we? It shouldn't be a way to translate it, to transmit it to also to the further line. So yeah.
Yes, and I mean, I think, well, you also highlighted the importance of women. So that would be a nice bridge to explaining a little bit more about the context of Peru. Many people don't even know that Peru even you know what I'm going to say, that Peru even has black people, or Peru even has, African descended populations. But is it the same there in terms of women being the carriers of history and the archives? Living archives?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yes, the women made a lot of research and carry the tradition of in different places and in Afro-Peruvian communities too. The example with Victoria Santa Cruz is she has a big name, and it was a great musician, but also a great researcher. So when Impact asked me to introduce these ideas and make some connections, I thinking about actually rhythm, like something that is very present on the work of Afro-Peruvian people on the work of indigenous communities, but in the work of African communities. So it's all connected. Yes, in Peru we have a strong Afro-Peruvian population. It's not that we are not like the majority, but we are mostly different parts in the north of Peru and in the south. We are struggle with different problems related with education, related with access to opportunities and health, but that's part of life in South America also, I suppose.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you. Let's open the floor to questions from the audience now. Yes, finally we can see you. I see a hand. Is there all the way at the back, I think. Oh, careful this time.
Can you put your hand up, please?
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the presentations and just bringing back the point of everything is contemporary and marooning, quilombismo, to quote Abdias do Nascimento, is not something that belongs to the past. And given that the idea of escaping an oppressive situation and finding solace in world building, as was mentioned, so marooning as world building, not only escaping, and finding collective, finding community, I would ask what would be the practice that you see today. I think in the case of Ronald, I've seen a bit of that in his presentation, but what would be your contemporary practice of marooning in what you're doing today? How do you create worlds? How do you create community? How do you find spaces that allow you to escape global neoliberal capitalism that makes everybody become an individual that has to create their own brand and survive and compete to everybody else? How can you find, community making in your practice today in order to, to seize on the ancestrality of marooning and quilombismo, but that you also create spaces for community in your own practice?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I could add to that, how do you escape the systems that dominate us every day that are technological, for example, the internet and social media? Mm-hmm. Can we apply the principle of the fugitive or the escapee to these systems? Can we escape these systems in any way? Great question. Anybody wants to take that one?
I'm not sure if I understand the question clearly. Mm-hmm. But if I'm not wrong, I think it's important that we do it through history, to the archive that already exists. I think we need to be really critical of what is in front of us, mm-hmm. and ask what is in front. Or what is in front of me? Is it fact? We should be able to look beyond the image. Mm-hmm. If I have to use an example, the Moana Po mask, it's a mask that is used in West African countries such as Angola and Congo. And when you look at the mask, you see all these signs on it. Mm-hmm. When you go to a museum, you see that, and the history, it's erased from it. Mm-hmm. And I think when you ask yourself why are these signs on this mask, and you will find out that it has to do with colonial past. Mm-hmm. And I think being critical about that and making sure that the story is a big change through contemporary art, which I try to do. And also ethical responsibility is also key, because I bring communities together to visit maroon art. Instead of making aesthetic, the museum way of doing. For example, when I talk about the research that I've done, I've been the research that I've done was about the lost mask within the Maroon community, because I've done so much research about masks, and nobody could tell me if there were mass tradition in the Maroon, and the answer was no. That was so the reason why I went to the inland of Suriname to find the answer, and it was such a hard research. But eventually, I found the traces of the mask. So from that trace, I tried to bring it back alive, because it's something that is a bit erased and will be erased in 10 years, I think. That was something that the chief also said, that history of Maroon will be erased in 10 years, which I think is a bit of a big comment. But I think trying to work to bring it back in a different way instead of the cultural way, I think that's a really good way to keep it intact.
And maybe even glitch the system or find...
Yeah, oblivious of it, because culture has also things that you do not agree with. So that's something you have to keep in mind.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly, yes.
Or the other way. Okay, perfect. I really like all of your presentations, and especially the link between like technology and ancestral intelligence. And I was wondering, how do you ensure that, of course, there are, like I'm a Maroon myself, that it gets like a bigger, I forgot a word, like a draagvlak, like a lot of more people are willing to hear more about it, because I like the way, I think, Meredith, you first like make fashion, so that makes it a bit more tangible and more, bit more mainstream. So I'm wondering, of course, you have your art, language. How do you ensure that more people are going to get curious to know more about it?
Traveling, I would say. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to...
No. In my case, as I said, we need to teach the way we learn in this era. You cannot escape technology. In my opinion, you need to use technology. I would distinct two kind of communities: the online community and the offline community. The offline community, we talk about elders, villages, cultural groups. They have knowledge. They pass on context. They pass on history. They pass on the stories. So that's the offline part. The online part, online helps us get better reach. It connects, for instance, younger people and people in the diaspora. And my point is, when the community is a co-creator and has ownership, knowledge lives. Knowledge, you begin to feel knowledge. Knowledge is sustainable. Knowledge is then relevant. So approaching it from a point of view of disseminating the information, the knowledge, by digital ways, distincting those communities, I think that's the way anyway, that's my approach to this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a problem with, when we speak about technology, we need to speak also about the power behind technology. No, that is what happened now. We have a lot of data. Like, this is the biggest amount of data that we have in the history of humankind. We have a lot of money. This is the time in the history of humankind that there's a lot of money in different organizations. The most powerful companies in the history of the world live now and are tech companies. And what they do with tech companies, they made videos of cats. in TikTok. I mean, we can do it better, right? Because there is a lot of people that not just work for Google, not just work for Microsoft. There's a lot of people that made code, that worked on Garage, that work on hackathons, that make different designs. We need to make this different conversation. When we think about tradition, when we think about technology, we also have to think about oral tradition, about community. And community is not only your people, it's not only your family. I mean, I love my family, but could be other people. Could be coders, could be designers, and also we need this all kind of connections to experiment. It's a hard work. It's a hard work that artists have now, that science has now, and also technicians have now. So this kind of movement, this kind of events are a big part of that kind of change that is needed. You know, combine arts with science, combine arts with other kinds of knowledge.
Okay. I think we are out of time. Yes. First of all, just want to thank this stellar panel for coming here. This was, I think, a fantastic conversation, and thank you for bearing with us and for your great questions. And please feel free to continue questions after we take a break with the panelists. But please give them a round of applause. Okay, so we will take a break and reconvene. Is it Etienne?
Yeah, thank you.
Etienne.
Great.
That's
So the break and then
Ukaba.
Ukaba.
Ukaba. Your accent,